The gunshot echoed across the rugged Montana wilderness as Madeline Johnston slumped against the stagecoach wheel, her trembling hands pressing against the growing crimson stain on her side. Around her lay the scattered remains of what should have been a routine journey to Gold Hill: splintered wood, overturned luggage, and 3 bodies cooling in the afternoon sun. The stagecoach driver and the guard had been killed instantly. So had Mr. Patterson, the banker who'd been sitting across from her, his pocket watch still ticking against his chest, though its owner never would again. "Keep moving," Madeline whispered to herself, choking back a sob as she dragged her body toward the dense tree line. The Blackfoot Ridge gang wouldn't return to confirm their kills. They never did, but wolves and mountain lions would soon be drawn by the scent of blood. Her blood. She'd been lucky. The bullet had only grazed her side, but the deep gash from being thrown against jagged metal during the ambush was bleeding profusely. The year was 1878, and the Montana Territory was still a lawless frontier in many ways. Madeline had known the risks when she'd left Philadelphia 3 weeks ago, but desperation had a way of making danger seem like an acceptable companion. The forest floor felt cool against her cheek when she finally collapsed. She'd managed to crawl perhaps half a mile from the wreckage, following a small stream that tumbled down from the foothills. Her vision blurred as she watched the water flow past, tinged pink where her hand trailed in it. 24 years of life, and this was how it would end, alone in the wilderness, with no one to even know where to find her body. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd fled east to west to escape death, only to find it waiting for her in the wild Montana landscape. As consciousness began to slip away, Madeline thought she heard hoofbeats, or perhaps it was just her heartbeat pounding in her ears. A shadow fell across her face, blocking the dappled sunlight filtering through the pines. "Madam, can you hear me?" The voice was deep, tinged with a slight drawl that marked him as not being from these parts originally. Through half-lidded eyes, Madeline saw a man dismounting from a tall buckskin horse. Dust covered his denim pants and leather vest. A worn Stetson shaded piercing blue eyes that were now wide with concern. "Stage. Ambush," she managed, her voice a weak rasp. "Don't try to talk," the stranger said, kneeling beside her. "I saw the wreckage. Those bastards hit another one." His jaw tightened as he gently moved her hand away from the wound. "You're losing too much blood. I need to get you somewhere safe." When he lifted her, the pain exploded through her side, and the world went mercifully black. Madeline woke to the crackling of a fire and the scent of coffee. For a moment, disoriented, she thought she was back in her father's house in Philadelphia. Then the pain in her side returned with brutal clarity, and she remembered. "Careful now," said the same deep voice from before. "You'll tear my stitches if you move too quick." She turned her head to find the stranger sitting on a log beside a small campfire, a coffee pot nestled in the embers. They were in some sort of shallow cave or rock overhang, sheltered from the elements, but with a clear view of the surrounding forest. The man had removed his hat, revealing thick dark hair that curled slightly at his neck. He wasn't young, perhaps 35, with lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of years squinting against the sun. "You stitched me up?" Madeline asked, her throat parched. The man nodded, pouring coffee into a tin cup. "Had to. Would have bled out otherwise." He approached and helped her sit up slightly, supporting her back with one strong arm while offering water from a canteen with his free hand. "Yancey Shaw," he said simply. "Horse trader. Was heading to Gold Hill when I saw buzzards circling." Madeline drank greedily, the water cool and sweet on her tongue. "Madeline Johnston. I was going to Gold Hill too." She paused, looking around. "How long was I unconscious?" "Most of the day. Sun's setting now." Yancey glanced toward the cave entrance, where the light was indeed turning golden. "We'll stay here tonight. Not safe to move you, and I don't fancy traveling these parts after dark with the Blackfoot Ridge boys around." Madeline tried to sit up straighter and winced. Looking down, she realized she was wearing only her chemise above the waist, with a bandage wrapped around her midsection. Her traveling dress and corset were folded nearby, the side torn and stiff with dried blood. Seeing her discomfort, Yancey turned away, giving her privacy. "Had to cut your corset off to get to the wound. Saved a piece of it for the stitches. Sorry about that. You saved my life, Mr. Shaw. I think I can forgive the loss of a corset." Despite her pain, Madeline found herself smiling slightly at the man's obvious discomfort. "Have you done this before? The stitching, I mean." He handed her the coffee cup without meeting her eyes. "Horses mostly, but same principle, I reckon." "And do your horses usually survive this procedure?" she asked, sipping the strong black liquid. That earned a short laugh. "Most do." His face grew serious again. "Those men who hit your stage, they took everything. Everything of value. Watches, jewelry, the strongbox, even my trunk." Madeline closed her eyes briefly, but they missed what mattered most. Her hand instinctively went to her boot, where a small pouch was still securely tucked inside. Yancey noticed but didn't comment. Instead, he moved back to the fire and began slicing jerky into a small pot. "Rest now. I'll keep watch tonight. Come morning, we'll figure out how to get you to Gold Hill." As darkness fell, Yancey positioned himself at the entrance of their shelter, rifle across his knees. The night came alive with sounds: owls hooting, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush, and occasionally, the distant howl of wolves. Madeline drifted between sleep and wakefulness, the pain in her side flaring whenever she moved. During one such moment of consciousness, she noticed Yancey staring intently out into the darkness, his body tense. "What is it?" she whispered. "Thought I heard something," he replied without turning. "Probably nothing. Go back to sleep." But Madeline had spent the past year learning to read between the lines of what men said. "It's them, isn't it? The gang?" Yancey sighed and finally glanced back at her. "Might be. Sometimes they circle back if they think someone survived who could identify them." Fear gripped her heart. I didn't see their faces. They wore bandanas. Doesn't matter to men like that." Yancey checked his rifle, then his revolver. "But don't worry, they'd have to get through me first, and I'm not in a dying mood tonight." There was something in his voice, a hard edge that hadn't been there before, that made Madeline wonder about this man who had saved her. What was a horse trader doing alone in this wilderness, armed like he was expecting trouble? "Why are you helping me, Mr. Shaw?" she asked softly. He was silent so long she thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "Because 19 months ago my sister was on a stage that got hit. Nobody stopped to help her." His voice was flat, but his knuckles were white where he gripped the rifle. "Found her 3 days later. Too late." "I'm sorry," Madeline whispered. "Get some sleep, Miss Johnston. I'll be right here all night." Somehow, despite the pain and fear, those words comforted her enough that she eventually drifted back to sleep. True to his word, Yancey stood guard all night. Twice, Madeline woke to find him in exactly the same position, silhouetted against the night sky, vigilant and unwavering. By the time dawn broke over the Montana mountains, her fever had lessened, and the worst of the pain had dulled to a persistent throb. "How are you feeling?" Yancey asked, crouching beside her with fresh water. "Like I've been shot and thrown from a stagecoach," Madeline replied with a weak smile. "But better than yesterday." His lips quirked up at one corner. "Good enough to travel. Gold Hill's about 15 miles south. We could make it by nightfall if we take it slow. I can manage." Madeline tried to stand and immediately regretted it, gasping as fire lanced through her side. Yancey caught her before she could fall. "Maybe not," he muttered. "Look, I can fashion a travois, pull you behind my horse." "It won't be comfortable, but—" "No," she interrupted firmly. "I can ride. Just help me get dressed." He raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. With careful hands he helped her into her torn dress, averting his eyes whenever possible. The corset was beyond repair, which was probably for the best given her injury. Even without it, each movement sent waves of pain through her body. Once she was dressed, Yancey packed up their small camp, kicked dirt over the fire, and led his horse to a nearby rock that Madeline could use as a mounting block. The buckskin eyed her warily but stood still as Yancey helped her onto its back. "This is Thunder," he said, patting the horse's neck. "Best mount I ever had." Madeline gripped the saddle horn as Yancey swung up behind her, his chest warm against her back as he reached around for the reins. It was improper. Of course, a lady riding in such proximity to a man she barely knew, but propriety seemed a distant concern out here in the wilderness. They rode slowly, following what Yancey said was an old trapper's trail that would eventually connect with the main road to Gold Hill. The motion of the horse aggravated Madeline's wound, but she gritted her teeth against the pain, determined not to show weakness. "So what brings a Philadelphia lady to Montana territory?" Yancey asked after they had been riding for an hour or so. "I'm guessing that's where you're from by your accent." Madeline tensed slightly. "What makes you think I'm from Philadelphia, the way you say your vowels? Plus, your boots are Eastern made, too fine for out here." She hadn't realized her origins were so obvious. "You're observant, Mr. Shaw. In my line of work, you learn to notice things." "So, Philadelphia," Madeline sighed. "Yes, but that's behind me now. I'm meeting my uncle in Gold Hill. He owns the mercantile there." It wasn't entirely a lie. Matthew Johnston did own the mercantile in Gold Hill, though he wasn't actually her uncle. He was her father's cousin, and the only family member who had offered help when everything fell apart in Philadelphia. "Johnston. Matthew Johnston?" Yancey asked, surprise evident in his voice. "You know him?" "Everyone in Gold Hill knows Matthew. Good man, fair prices, terrible poker player." There was a smile in Yancey's voice. "He didn't mention family coming to visit." "It was a somewhat sudden decision on my part," Madeline replied carefully. Yancey didn't press further, which she appreciated. They rode in companionable silence for a while, the landscape gradually changing from dense forest to more open country. By midday, they had reached a small stream, and Yancey suggested they stop to rest and water the horse. He helped Madeline dismount, his strong hands gentle on her waist as he lowered her to the ground. The pain made her dizzy, and she leaned against him longer than was strictly necessary, breathing in the scent of leather, horse, and something uniquely him. "Let me check those stitches," Yancey said, helping her sit on a fallen log. "Make sure nothing's torn loose." Madeline nodded, turning slightly so he could access the wound. His fingers were surprisingly gentle as he lifted the edge of her dress and examined the bandage. "Bleeding stopped," he reported. "Might actually heal clean if we're lucky. You must come from sturdy stock, Miss Johnston." "Madeline," she said impulsively. "Please, after all this, I think you can call me Madeline." He looked up, those blue eyes catching hers, and for a moment, something passed between them, something that made her heart beat faster in a way that had nothing to do with her injury. "Madeline," he repeated, the name sounding different in his low drawl. "Then I'm Yancey, not Mr. Shaw." The moment was broken by Thunder snorting and stamping his hoof. Instantly, Yancey was on alert, his hand dropping to his revolver as he scanned the surroundings. "What is it?" Madeline whispered. "Not sure," he murmured, helping her to her feet. But Thunder's spooked, and he doesn't spook easy. They had just reached the horse when a voice called out from the trees on the far side of the stream. Well, well, what do we have here? 3 riders emerged from the forest, spreading out along the bank. They were rough-looking men, unshaven and dirty. The one in the center, a tall man with a scarred face partially hidden behind a red bandana, leaned forward on his saddle horn, studying them with cold eyes. "Looks like we missed one yesterday, boys," he said with a chilling smile. "And she found herself a protector. How sweet." Yancey stepped in front of Madeline, his hand still on his gun but not drawing, not yet. "We don't want trouble," he said calmly. "Just passing through." "Passing through with a witness to our business," said the leader, shaking his head. "That's trouble already, friend." Madeline's blood ran cold as she realized these were the men who had attacked the stagecoach. The red bandana, she remembered seeing it through the window just before the shooting started. "I didn't see anything," she said quickly. "I was unconscious for most of it." The leader laughed. "Hear that, boys? The lady was unconscious." His expression hardened. "Don't matter what you saw, you lived, which means you talked, which means you're a problem." Yancey's stance shifted slightly. "You boys really want to do this? 3 against 1 might seem like good odds, but I promise you, at least 2 of you won't ride away." The quiet confidence in his voice gave the bandits pause. The leader studied Yancey more carefully, eyes narrowing. "Wait a minute, I know you." He straightened in his saddle. "You're Shaw." "The bounty hunter." "Bounty hunter." Madeline glanced at Yancey in surprise. He told her he was a horse trader. "Was," Yancey corrected. "I'm just passing through now, but old habits die hard, and I'd sure hate to have to kill you boys over a misunderstanding." The 3 men exchanged looks, clearly recalculating their odds. "Blackwood won't be happy about a witness," said the man on the left, a wiry fellow with a pockmarked face. "Blackwood's not here," replied the leader. He stared at Yancey for a long moment, then spat into the stream. "This ain't over, Shaw. We'll be seeing you in Gold Hill." With that, they wheeled their horses around and disappeared back into the trees. As soon as they were gone, Madeline turned to Yancey. "Bounty hunter, you told me you were a horse trader." "I am," he replied, scanning the tree line to make sure the men were truly gone. "Now, used to hunt bounties, gave it up 2 years ago." He helped her back onto Thunder. "We need to move. Those 3 might change their minds, or they might go fetch more of their gang." "Who's Blackwood?" she asked as he mounted behind her. Yancey's body tensed against her back. "Leader of the Blackfoot Ridge gang. Mean son of a," he caught himself. "Mean piece of work. Been terrorizing this territory for 3 years now." They rode hard for the next few hours, stopping only when absolutely necessary. Madeline's side throbbed with each bounce of the horse, but she didn't complain. The encounter with the bandits had shaken her more than she wanted to admit, bringing back the terror of the ambush. As the sun began to set, the landscape opened up to reveal a valley nestled between 2 mountain ranges. In the distance, Madeline could see smoke rising from chimneys and the outline of buildings against the darkening sky. "Gold Hill," Yancey said, slowing Thunder to a walk. "Not much to look at, but it's got a doctor who can tend to you properly." The town was indeed small, one main street with several side streets branching off. A couple of saloons, a general store, a small church, and various other businesses lined the dusty road. Despite its modest size, after the wilderness, it looked like civilization to Madeline's eyes. People stopped to stare as Yancey rode down the main street with Madeline before him. She was acutely aware of her torn, blood-stained dress and disheveled appearance. They halted outside a 2-story building with a sign reading Johnston's Mercantile, and Yancey dismounted before carefully helping Madeline down. The door of the store burst open before her feet touched the ground. "Good Lord in heaven!" Madeline. A tall, bearded man with kind eyes and graying temples rushed toward them. I heard about the stage getting hit. I thought I feared, he broke off, emotion choking his voice as he reached for her. Uncle Matthew, Madeline said weakly, relief flooding through her at the sight of a familiar face. She's hurt, Yancey explained. Took a bullet graze and a bad cut. I stitched her up, but she needs the doctor. Matthew Johnston nodded, his face grave. Thank you, Shaw, I'll never forget this. He turned and called to someone inside the store. Jacob, run for Dr. Miller, quick now. The next hour passed in a blur for Madeline. She was carried into the living quarters behind the mercantile, where a kindly woman introduced as Mrs. Peterson, the housekeeper, helped her into a clean nightgown. Dr. Miller arrived, an elderly gentleman with steady hands who praised Yancey's stitching before cleaning and rebandaging the wound. Through it all, Madeline kept looking for Yancey, but he had disappeared once Matthew took over her care. When she was finally settled in a comfortable bed with the doctor's laudanum dulling her pain, she asked Matthew about him. Shaw, he's a complicated man, Matthew said, sitting beside her bed. Used to be one of the best bounty hunters in the territory. Had a reputation for always bringing them in alive rather than dead. But he quit about 2 years ago after some tragedy. No one knows exactly what happened. Now he trades horses, keeps to himself mostly. He patted her hand. But you rest now. We can talk more tomorrow. He saved my life, Madeline murmured, feeling the medicine pulling her toward sleep. Stood guard all night. The bandits came back, but he protected me. Matthew's expression darkened. The Blackfoot Ridge gang has gotten bolder lately. That's the 3rd stage they've hit this month. He sighed heavily. But don't worry about that now. You're safe here. As sleep claimed her, Madeline wondered if that was true. The bandits' words echoed in her mind. We'll be seeing you in Gold Hill. They knew where she was now, and for some reason they seemed to fear what she might have seen. But what troubled her more was Yancey's disappearance. After everything they'd been through, he'd simply vanished without a goodbye. She told herself it shouldn't matter, he was a stranger who'd done his Christian duty, nothing more. So why did her heart ache at the thought of never seeing him again? Madeline spent the next 3 days recovering in Matthew's home, gradually regaining her strength. The mercantile owner had a small but comfortable apartment behind his store, where he had lived alone since his wife passed away 5 years earlier. Mrs. Peterson came daily to cook and clean, and Dr. Miller visited each morning to check Madeline's wound, which was healing remarkably well. You're lucky, the doctor told her on the 3rd day. No infection, and the cut wasn't as deep as it could have been. Shaw did a fine job with those stitches. I'll take them out in another week or so. Have you seen him? Madeline asked, trying to sound merely curious. Mr. Shaw, I mean. I'd like to thank him properly. Dr. Miller shook his head. He rode out the day after he brought you in. Some business in Helena, from what I heard. Madeline couldn't help the disappointment that washed over her. She had hoped. Well, she wasn't entirely sure what she had hoped for. It was foolish to feel any attachment to a man she had known for barely 2 days. A man who, apparently, hadn't even felt the need to say goodbye. That afternoon, she felt strong enough to venture downstairs to the mercantile. Matthew protested at first, but when she insisted she was going stir-crazy in bed, he relented, helping her down the narrow stairs to the store. Johnston's mercantile was larger than it appeared from outside, with shelves stocked with everything from dry goods to tools, fabrics to firearms. A pot-bellied stove sat in the center, surrounded by a few chairs where old-timers were engaged in a lively discussion about local politics. Conversation halted when Madeline entered, and several men stood in respect. News of her ordeal had clearly spread through town. Miss Johnston, said one elderly man, tipping his hat. Good to see you on your feet. Nasty business with that stage. Thank you, Madeline replied with a small smile. I was fortunate that Mr. Shaw came along when he did. Yancey's a good man, said another customer, a rugged-looking miner with a thick beard. Saved my boy from a mountain lion last year. Doesn't talk much about it, though not one to seek praise. Matthew guided Madeline to a chair behind the counter. You can sit here and keep me company. But promise you'll tell me if you start feeling tired. She nodded, grateful for something to occupy her mind besides thoughts of Yancey Shaw and memories of the attack. Matthew introduced her to the regulars as his niece from Philadelphia, and no one questioned the relationship, though Madeline knew that in a town this size, the truth of her connection to him would eventually come out. As the afternoon wore on, Madeline observed the workings of the store. Matthew was clearly well respected in Gold Hill. Customers greeted him warmly, and he knew not only their names but details about their families and work. He extended credit to those who needed it without hesitation, and offered advice on everything from which axe handle would last longest to how much flour was needed for a church social. You've built something special here, Madeline commented during a lull in customers. Matthew smiled, though there was a touch of sadness in his eyes. Mary and I always wanted it to be more than just a store, a place where folks could come together, you know. He glanced around the shop fondly. After she passed, keeping it going the way she would have wanted, it gave me purpose. Madeline reached out to squeeze his hand. She would be proud. I hope so. He cleared his throat. Now about your situation, your letter was, well, not very detailed. You said you needed a fresh start away from your father's influence. I'm happy to help, of course, but the bell over the door jangled, interrupting whatever Matthew had been about to ask. Both turned to see a woman enter, tall and imposing, dressed in an expensive burgundy traveling suit that somehow looked out of place in the modest mercantile. She surveyed the store with obvious disdain before her gaze landed on Madeline. Well, she said, her voice carrying across the room, if it isn't Madeline Johnston, risen from the dead. Madeline felt the blood drain from her face. Mrs. Hargrove. The woman approached the counter with measured steps, each click of her heeled boots like a hammer on Madeline's nerves. When I heard a stagecoach was attacked and all passengers presumed dead, I thought justice had finally been served. Imagine my disappointment to discover you survived. Matthew stepped forward protectively. Madam, I don't know who you are, but my niece has been through an ordeal. Niece, Mrs. Hargrove laughed, a brittle sound devoid of humor. Is that what she told you? Did she also tell you she's wanted for theft in Philadelphia? That she stole from my family valuable family heirlooms before fleeing west? The store had gone silent, all eyes now on the confrontation unfolding at the counter. Madeline stood shakily, one hand pressed against her wounded side. That's not true, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. And you know it, Mrs. Hargrove. Do I? The older woman arched a perfectly shaped eyebrow. The authorities in Philadelphia certainly believed me, as did your own father. Madeline flinched at the mention of her father. My father would believe anything that excused his failure to protect his own daughter. Mrs. Hargrove's eyes narrowed. Such dramatics. You always did have a flair for them. She turned to address the now captivated audience in the store. This woman worked as a companion to my daughter. She abused our trust, stole jewelry worth hundreds of dollars, and ran west with her ill-gotten gains. That's enough, Matthew said firmly. I don't know what grievance you have against Madeline, but this is my store, and I'll thank you to take your accusations elsewhere. Gladly, Mrs. Hargrove replied with a cold smile. I've already spoken with Sheriff Collins. He'll be paying you a visit soon, I imagine. She looked back at Madeline. You didn't really think you could escape, did you? Helena isn't so far from civilization that word doesn't travel." With that, she turned and swept out of the store, leaving a stunned silence in her wake. Matthew was the first to recover. "Friends," he said to the gawking customers, "I believe we're closing early today. If you need anything urgent, come back tomorrow." His tone left no room for argument, and the store emptied quickly, though Madeline could hear the whispers beginning before the door even closed behind the last customer. When they were alone, Matthew locked the door and turned to Madeline, his expression troubled but not unkind. "I think," he said gently, "it's time you told me the whole truth." Upstairs, with a cup of strong tea warming her hands, Madeline told her story. About coming to work as a companion to Elizabeth Hargrove, a spoiled girl of 19 whose father owned one of the largest shipping companies in Philadelphia. About Elizabeth's brother, Richard, who had taken an inappropriate interest in Madeline from her first day in the household. "He would corner me when no one was around," she explained, staring into her teacup rather than meeting Matthew's eyes. "Make suggestions. Touch me when he thought he could get away with it. I complained to Mrs. Hargrove, but she accused me of trying to entrap her son into marriage." Matthew's face darkened. "Go on," he said quietly. "One night about 3 months ago I was alone in the house except for Richard. Elizabeth and her parents were at some society event. He came to my room. He'd been drinking." Madeline's voice faltered. "I fought him off, but in the struggle, a valuable necklace was broken, a family heirloom he'd brought as a gift. When his parents returned, he claimed I'd stolen it and several other pieces of jewelry, then damaged the necklace when he caught me." "And they believed him," Matthew guessed. Madeline nodded. "My father was summoned. He sided with the Hargroves, said I'd always been headstrong and ungrateful. He agreed to repay them for the supposedly stolen items, which put him deeply in debt to them, and then he told me I was no longer welcome in his home." She took a shaky breath. "I had nowhere to go. The story spread through Philadelphia society. No respectable household would hire me. So I wrote to you, the only family member who might help. I took what little money I had saved, bought a ticket west, and here I am." Matthew was silent for a long moment. "And the pouch you keep in your boot? The one you were so worried about when you first arrived?" Madeline startled, surprised he had noticed. Slowly she reached down and withdrew the small leather pouch. From it she pulled a simple gold locket. "My mother's," she explained. "The only thing of value I truly own. I was afraid the bandits would take it, but they never searched me." She hesitated, then added, "There's also this." She pulled out a folded piece of paper and handed it to Matthew. He unfolded it carefully. It was a letter from Elizabeth Hargrove, dated 2 weeks after Madeline had left Philadelphia. "My dearest Madeline," Matthew read aloud, "I cannot remain silent any longer. What my brother did, what he attempted to do, was unforgivable. What my parents did in covering for him was worse. I have told Father I know the truth, and though he forbade me from making it public, I could not bear the thought of you suffering alone with this injustice. If you can find it in your heart to respond, know that at least one Hargrove believes you and grieves for the wrong done to you. Your friend always, Elizabeth." He refolded the letter carefully. "And yet Mrs. Hargrove is here, still accusing you." "Elizabeth was always weak-willed," Madeline replied sadly. "I imagine her parents discovered she had written to me and forced her to recant. The Hargroves care about their reputation above all else." Matthew reached across the table and took her hand. "I believe you, Madeline, and I'll stand by you, but I need to know, are there actual charges against you in Philadelphia? Could they legally force you to return?" "I don't know," she admitted. "Your letter reached me before I could learn whether formal charges had been filed. I just ran." He nodded thoughtfully. Then we'll need to speak with Sheriff Collins before Mrs. Hargrove fills his head with her version of events. He squeezed her hand. Don't worry, Gold Hill takes care of its own. But I'm not, you're my family, Matthew interrupted firmly. That makes you one of us. The warm certainty in his voice brought tears to Madeline's eyes. After months of betrayal and abandonment, to have anyone believe in her was overwhelming. Thank you, she whispered. Matthew stood, his expression determined. Rest now. I'll go speak with the sheriff and Madeline. He paused at the door. Keep that letter safe. It may be the only evidence we have of your innocence. After he left, Madeline sank back against her pillows, exhaustion washing over her. Just when she had thought she might find peace in Gold Hill, the past had caught up with her. And now the whole town would know her as an accused thief, a woman of questionable character, including Yancey Shaw, whenever he returned from Helena. The thought brought an unexpected pang of sadness. She had no right to care what a near stranger thought of her. And yet, during those 2 days when he had protected her, something had formed between them, a connection that went beyond mere gratitude. Now, that tenuous bond would be severed before it had truly begun. Morning brought Sheriff Collins to Matthew's door. He was a stocky man with a graying mustache and shrewd eyes that missed nothing. After assuring himself that Madeline was well enough to answer questions, he got straight to the point. Mrs. Hargrove claims you stole jewelry valued at over $400 from her family in Philadelphia, he said, notebook open on his knee. She says there's a warrant for your arrest back east. And has she produced this warrant? Matthew asked from where he stood by the window. Not yet, the sheriff admitted. Says it's being forwarded. He looked back at Madeline. What's your side of this, Miss Johnston? Madeline recounted her story again, this time including details she had been too embarrassed to share with Matthew the previous evening, the precise nature of Richard Hargrove's advances, the bruises she had hidden afterward, the whispered threats if she ever spoke of what had happened. When she finished, Sheriff Collins was silent for a long moment, tapping his pencil against his notebook. It's a serious accusation against a prominent family, he said finally. And without evidence, it's your word against theirs. She has this, Matthew said, producing Elizabeth's letter from his vest pocket. Written by the Hargrove's daughter herself. The sheriff read it carefully before handing it back. It's something, he acknowledged, but whether it would stand up in court is another matter entirely. He closed his notebook. Here's how I see it. Until I receive an official warrant, I have no grounds to arrest you, Miss Johnston. Mrs. Hargrove can make all the accusations she wants, but without legal backing, they're just talk. Relief flooded through Madeline. Thank you, Sheriff. Don't thank me yet, he warned. If a warrant does arrive, I'll have no choice but to act on it, and Mrs. Hargrove seems like a woman who gets what she wants. After the sheriff left, Matthew insisted Madeline stay upstairs, away from curious townsfolk. Just until this blows over, he said. People will find something new to gossip about soon enough. But by afternoon, it was clear the scandal wasn't going to fade quickly. Mrs. Peterson brought news along with lunch. Mrs. Hargrove had taken a room at the Gold Hill Hotel and was making it her business to tell anyone who would listen about the criminal hiding in the mercantile. Most folks are reserving judgment, the housekeeper reported as she set out a plate of sandwiches. You've got Matthew's endorsement, and that counts for a lot in this town. But that woman, she's poison with a sweet smile, that one. Madeline picked at her food without appetite. I should leave, she said quietly. Go somewhere else where I won't bring trouble to Matthew's doorstep. Nonsense, Mrs. Peterson replied firmly. Running just makes you look guilty. Besides, where would you go? You're still healing. The question hung in the air, unanswered. Madeline had fled Philadelphia with no real plan beyond reaching Gold Hill and the relative safety of Matthew's home. She had no money, no prospects, and now, a damaged reputation that would follow her anywhere in the territory where the Hargroves had influence. Later that evening, as dusk settled over Gold Hill, Madeline was sitting by her bedroom window, watching the street below, when she saw a familiar figure ride into town. Even from a distance, she recognized the buckskin horse and the man's straight-backed posture in the saddle. Yancey Shaw had returned. Her heart quickened as she watched him dismount outside the livery stable, exchange words with the stableman, and then head toward the saloon. He hadn't looked toward the mercantile, hadn't shown any indication he was thinking about her. Why would he? She chided herself. You were an obligation, nothing more. But even as she thought it, she remembered the gentleness of his hands as he tended her wound, the vigilance with which he had stood guard through the night, the warmth of his body against hers as they rode toward Gold Hill. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Matthew entered, carrying a tray with dinner. Saw you weren't hungry earlier but thought you might feel differently now, he said, setting the tray on the bedside table. He glanced toward the window. Anything interesting happening out there? Mr. Shaw is back, Madeline replied, trying to sound casual. I saw him ride in just now. Matthew nodded, a knowing look crossing his face. Thought you might want to know he asked about you this morning before he rode out to his place. Wanted to make sure you were healing well. He did. Madeline couldn't keep the surprise from her voice. Seemed genuinely concerned. Matthew sat on the edge of the bed. Shaw's not much for town life. Has a small ranch about 5 miles out. Breeds horses some of the finest in the territory from what I hear. I thought he was a horse trader. That too, but the breeding is his real passion. Matthew studied her face. He's a good man, Madeline, despite what some folks say about his bounty hunting days. She looked away, feeling a blush rise to her cheeks. I hardly know him. But you'd like to know him better, Matthew observed gently. It's written all over your face when you say his name. Madeline opened her mouth to deny it, then closed it again. What was the point in pretending? It's foolish, she said instead. Even if he did feel something, which he doesn't, who would want a woman with my reputation? Especially now, with Mrs. Hargrove spreading her poison. Matthew's expression grew serious. About that, I've been thinking. He stood and paced to the window, looking out at the darkening street. We need to find a way to discredit Mrs. Hargrove's accusations, or at least cast enough doubt that she gives up and goes home. How? It's my word against hers, and she has social standing, wealth, influence, and a weakness, Matthew interrupted. Her pride in her family name. If we could somehow get her to show her true colors in public. He trailed off, deep in thought. Madeline watched him, a small spark of hope kindling in her chest. You have an idea? Maybe. He turned back to her with a half-smile, but it would require help. And someone with experience in catching people at their worst. A bounty hunter, Madeline said slowly, understanding dawning. Matthew nodded. Exactly. If you're feeling up to a visitor tomorrow, I think it's time you and Yancey Shaw had a proper conversation. The following morning found Madeline dressed in one of Mrs. Peterson's altered dresses, her hair carefully arranged, sitting nervously in Matthew's small parlor. Her wound still pained her, but she had insisted on getting properly dressed for the first time since the attack. If she was going to ask for help, she would do it with dignity. When the knock came, her heart jumped to her throat. Matthew answered the door, and then Yancey Shaw was there, filling the doorframe with his broad shoulders. He had cleaned up since she'd last seen him. His dark hair was neatly combed, his jaw freshly shaved, his clothes free of trail dust. But his eyes were the same, that piercing blue that seemed to see right through pretense. Miss Johnston, he said, removing his hat. Good to see you looking better. Mr. Shaw, she replied, hating how breathless she sounded. Thank you for coming. Matthew gestured to a chair. Sit down, Shaw. Can I offer you coffee? Already had 3 cups. Yancey declined, though he did take the offered seat. Your message said it was urgent. It is, Matthew confirmed, closing the door and returning to the parlor. Madeline needs your help. Yancey's gaze shifted to her, questioning. I thought the doctoring part was done. It is, Madeline said. This is something else. She took a deep breath and explained about Mrs. Hargrove's arrival, the accusations, and the threat of a warrant from Philadelphia. Yancey listened without interruption, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he sat forward, elbows on his knees. So you need me to? What exactly? Run her out of town. Because I don't do that kind of work anymore, even for a good cause. No, Matthew said quickly. Nothing like that. We need to discredit her accusations, make her show her true nature in public so people will question her motives. And how do you propose I do that? Yancey asked, skepticism evident in his voice. You were a bounty hunter, Madeline said quietly. You must have had ways of getting reluctant witnesses to talk, of uncovering the truth when people tried to hide it. A small smile quirked the corner of Yancey's mouth. I did. But those methods don't generally work on society, ladies. Mrs. Hargrove is no lady, Madeline retorted with unexpected heat. She's a viper in silk. Yancey studied her for a moment, something like admiration flickering in his eyes. You really did stand up to her son, didn't you? Not many women would have the courage to fight back against a man in his position. I had no choice, Madeline replied simply. He nodded, as if confirming something to himself. All right, I'll help. But I need to know everything, every detail about the Hargroves, their business, their habits. Anything that might be used against them. Relief washed over Madeline. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me yet, Yancey warned. This could backfire. If she really does have influence with territorial officials, she could make trouble for all of us. It's a risk I'm willing to take, Madeline said firmly. I won't spend my life running from lies. For the next hour, they strategized. Madeline shared everything she knew about the Hargroves, their business dealings, social connections, and personal weaknesses. Mrs. Hargrove's obsession with appearances. Mr. Hargrove's rumored gambling debts. Richard's history of inappropriate behavior with other young women. The trouble is, Matthew pointed out, none of this helps us without proof. It's still just Madeline's word against theirs. Yancey had been mostly quiet, listening intently. Now he spoke up. There might be a way. He turned to Madeline. You said Elizabeth wrote to you admitting she knew the truth, if she was willing to do that once. You think she might help us? Madeline frowned. I doubt it. She was always terrified of her mother. Maybe, Yancey conceded, but fear and conscience are powerful forces and they don't always pull in the same direction. He stood, putting his hat back on. I need to send some telegrams, and then I think I should meet Mrs. Hargrove. Is that wise? Matthew asked. She'll be suspicious of anyone connected to Madeline. Yancey's smile had a predatory edge. Who says she'll know we're connected? He left shortly after, promising to return the next day with news. As soon as the door closed behind him, Matthew turned to Madeline with raised eyebrows. Well, what do you think? I think, she replied slowly, that Mrs. Hargrove has no idea what's coming for her. That evening, Madeline insisted on coming downstairs for dinner, tired of being confined to her room like a prisoner. Mrs. Peterson had prepared a hearty stew and fresh bread, and for the first time in days, Madeline found herself genuinely hungry. They were just finishing the meal when an urgent knock came at the back door. Matthew answered it to find Yancey standing there, his expression grim. We have a problem, he said without preamble, stepping inside. Mrs. Hargrove received a telegram this afternoon. The warrant from Philadelphia will be here within days. Madeline felt the blood drain from her face. Then it's over, she whispered. They really did file charges. Yancey shook his head. Not necessarily. From what my contact in the telegraph office gathered, it's not an official federal warrant, it's a county document based solely on the Hargrove's accusation. Might not even be legal across state lines. But Sheriff Collins won't know that, Matthew pointed out. He'll have to honor it, at least until a judge can review it. Exactly, Yancey confirmed. Which means we have maybe 3 days to resolve this before Madeline faces arrest. He turned to her, his blue eyes intense. I need your permission to move forward with a plan, one that's not entirely conventional. What kind of plan? She asked warily. One that involves me getting close to Mrs. Hargrove under false pretenses. I've already introduced myself as a businessman with shipping interests. He grimaced slightly. She was quite receptive. Apparently, the Hargrove shipping empire is looking for Western partners. You're going to trick her, Madeline said, understanding dawning. I prefer to think of it as giving her enough rope to hang herself, Yancey replied. But yes, essentially. I need to gain her trust quickly, get her to reveal her true motives for pursuing you so doggedly. Madeline thought about it. The idea of using deception, even against someone like Mrs. Hargrove, didn't sit well with her. But what choice did she have? Do it, she said finally. Whatever it takes. Yancey nodded, his expression softening. I'll do my best to make this right, Madeline, I promise. The way he said her name with a warmth that hadn't been there before sent a flutter through her chest. I know you will, she replied softly. After Yancey left, Madeline sat lost in thought. Matthew watched her with concern. Are you sure about this? He asked. Trusting Shaw with something so important, Madeline looked up, surprised by the question. Of course. He saved my life once already. Why wouldn't I trust him now? Matthew sighed. Because this is different. This isn't about physical danger, it's about your future, your reputation. And Shaw, well, his methods weren't always by the book in his bounty hunting days. What do you mean? Matthew hesitated. There were rumors, nothing proven, but some said he was willing to bend the law to get his man. He held up a hand when Madeline began to protest. I'm not saying don't trust him, just be prepared. This might get messy before it gets better. Madeline considered his words. I think, she said slowly, that sometimes messy is the only way forward. The next day passed in anxious waiting. Yancey had sent word that he was making progress with Mrs. Hargrove, but provided no details. Madeline tried to keep busy helping Matthew in the store, but each time the bell over the door rang, she tensed, expecting to see Sheriff Collins with a warrant in hand. By evening, her nerves were frayed. She sat by the window again, watching the street, when she noticed a commotion outside the Gold Hill Hotel. A stagecoach had arrived, unusual for that time of day, and several passengers were disembarking. One in particular caught her attention, a slight young woman in a fashionable traveling suit, her blonde hair peeking out from beneath a feathered hat. Even from a distance, there was something familiar about her bearing, the way she nervously clutched her reticule. Matthew. Madeline called, not taking her eyes from the scene below. Come quickly, he hurried to her side. What is it? I think that's Elizabeth Hargrove. Madeline pointed to the young woman who was now being escorted into the hotel by none other than Yancey Shaw. Matthew let out a low whistle. Shaw works fast, he murmured, but how did he? I don't know, Madeline replied, watching as the pair disappeared into the hotel, but I think we're about to find out. They didn't have to wait long. Less than an hour later, Yancey appeared at the back door, his expression unreadable. Is it really Elizabeth? Madeline asked as soon as he stepped inside. He nodded. Arrived on the afternoon stage from Billings. I sent a telegram to her directly 2 days ago, told her you were in trouble and needed her help. Wasn't sure she'd come." He removed his hat, running a hand through his hair. "She's terrified of her mother finding out she's here. I've put her in a room at the boarding house under a false name." "Does she know what we're planning?" Matthew asked. "Not entirely, but she wants to help." Yancey turned to Madeline. "She asked about you, if you were all right, if you hated her for not standing up to her parents sooner." Tears sprang to Madeline's eyes. "I could never hate Elizabeth. She was as much a victim of that household as I was in her way." "That's what I told her," Yancey said quietly. "She wants to see you." "Is that safe?" Matthew interjected. "If Mrs. Hargrove discovers her daughter is here, that's part of the plan," Yancey interrupted. "But not yet. First, Madeline needs to speak with Elizabeth privately. Tomorrow morning at the boarding house. Mrs. Hargrove will be occupied. I've arranged for her to meet with a supposed business associate at the hotel." The way he said it made Madeline suspect there was no actual business associate. Yancey Shaw was proving to be a master of misdirection. "And then," she prompted. Yancey's expression turned grim. "Then we spring the trap. But I need to be sure Elizabeth is truly willing to publicly contradict her mother. She says she is, but she's afraid," Madeline finished for him. "I understand. Let me talk to her. If anyone can convince her to stand firm, it's me." The following morning, Madeline made her way to the boarding house, a shawl pulled over her head to avoid recognition. Her side still ached, but the pain was manageable now, reduced to a dull throb that only sharpened when she moved too quickly. Mrs. Simmons, the boarding house proprietor, directed her to a room at the back of the house. Madeline knocked softly, her heart pounding. The door opened just a crack, then wider as Elizabeth recognized her visitor. "Madeline," she gasped, pulling her inside and closing the door quickly. "Oh, thank goodness!" The two women embraced, Elizabeth's slender form trembling against Madeline's. When they parted, Madeline was struck by the changes in her former charge. The spoiled girl she remembered had been replaced by a young woman with shadows under her eyes and tension in her jaw. "I came as soon as I got Mr. Shaw's telegram," Elizabeth said, leading Madeline to sit on the small bed. "Mother thinks I'm visiting school friends in Boston. If she knew I was here." She shuddered. "You're very brave to come," Madeline said gently. Elizabeth shook her head. "Not brave. Just tired. Tired of the lies, tired of watching Richard get away with everything." She took Madeline's hands in hers. "Is it true? Did Mother really accuse you publicly? Is there really a warrant?" "All true," Madeline confirmed. "She seems determined to see me punished, though I've done nothing wrong." "It's not about you," Elizabeth said with surprising bitterness. "It's about protecting the Hargrove name, always, always the family name." "Richard could," she broke off, blinking back tears. "Did Mr. Shaw tell you?" "About the others," Madeline frowned. "Others, after you left, there was another girl, a maid. Richard hurt her, badly. Father paid her family to keep quiet and sent her away." Elizabeth's voice dropped to a whisper. "And she wasn't the first, just the first I knew about. Mother has been covering for him for years." Cold horror washed over Madeline. "And they're never held accountable. Never." Elizabeth's hands tightened on Madeline's. "But this time it will be different. I've brought proof. Proof." Elizabeth stood and retrieved a small leather portfolio from her trunk. Letters, between mother and father, discussing Richard's indiscretions and how to handle them. And this. She pulled out a folded document. A copy of the settlement agreement with the maid's family. It's detailed. About what Richard did. Madeline stared at the documents, hardly daring to believe what she was seeing. "Elizabeth, this could ruin your family. I know." The younger woman's face was pale but determined. "But it has to stop. I can't live with myself otherwise." Madeline felt a surge of admiration for the girl she had once thought shallow and weak. "Are you sure? Once this becomes public, I'm sure," Elizabeth interrupted. "Mr. Shaw explained his plan to me. It's unconventional, but it will work." She squared her shoulders. "I'm ready." They spent the next hour discussing the details of Yancey's plan, which was indeed audacious. By the time Madeline left the boarding house, she was both terrified and exhilarated by what they were about to do. That afternoon, Mrs. Hargrove could be seen walking arm in arm with Yancey Shaw along Gold Hill's Main Street, apparently deep in conversation. Those who passed close enough reported that they were discussing a business arrangement, something to do with expanding the Hargrove shipping interests, to include overland routes to mining communities. Mrs. Hargrove seemed completely taken in, smiling and laughing in a way that made Madeline, watching from the mercantile window, want to scream warnings to Yancey about the viper whose confidence he was cultivating. But Yancey knew exactly what he was doing. As they passed the mercantile, he glanced up, catching Madeline's eye for just a moment. The look in his eyes was clear. Everything is proceeding as planned. That evening, a town meeting was called at the church. Such gatherings were common in Gold Hill, usually to discuss community issues or organize responses to problems like drought or outlaw activities. This one, however, had been requested by Mrs. Hargrove herself. "She wants to address the town about the criminal element in their midst," Matthew reported grimly after hearing the news. "Meaning you." "Perfect," Yancey said when told. "It's exactly what we need, a public forum where she can't control the narrative." As dusk fell, townsfolk made their way to the simple white church that served as Gold Hill's meeting place. Madeline, Matthew, and Yancey waited until most had arrived before slipping in through a side door. They took seats at the back, Madeline's heart pounding so loudly she was sure everyone could hear it. At the front of the room, Mrs. Hargrove stood beside Reverend Porter, her burgundy dress and perfect posture making her look like visiting royalty among the plainly dressed townsfolk. Sheriff Collins was there too, his expression troubled. "Friends and citizens of Gold Hill," Reverend Porter began, "we have a visitor who has requested time to address an issue of community concern. Mrs. Victoria Hargrove of Philadelphia has the floor." Mrs. Hargrove stepped forward, surveying the room with an expression of practiced concern. "Good people of Gold Hill," she began, her voice carrying clearly in the hushed church, "I come to you not to cause discord, but to warn you of a danger in your midst." She went on to describe Madeline as a cunning thief who had abused the trust of a kind employer, stolen valuable family heirlooms, and fled justice. Her performance was masterful, just the right balance of righteous indignation and sorrowful disappointment. "I understand your reluctance to believe ill of someone who has come to you claiming to be a victim," she continued. "Indeed, this young woman has a talent for presenting herself as persecuted. But I have here," she produced a folded document from her reticule, "a warrant for her arrest, issued by the Philadelphia authorities and recognized by your territorial governor." A murmur ran through the crowd. Sheriff Collins stepped forward and took the document, examining it with a frown. "It appears to be in order," he admitted reluctantly, "though I'll need to verify its authenticity." "Of course," Mrs. Hargrove said smoothly. "Take all the time you need, though not too much, I hope. My husband and son await our return." She turned back to the audience. "I ask only that you consider what I've told you, and perhaps question whether you truly know this woman who calls herself Madeline Johnston." It was time. Yancey squeezed Madeline's hand briefly before standing. "I have a question, Mrs. Hargrove," he called out, his voice cutting through the murmurs. All heads turned toward him. Mrs. Hargrove's eyes widened slightly in surprise before she composed herself. "Mr. Shaw, I didn't realize you had an interest in this matter." "I have an interest in justice," Yancey replied, moving to the center aisle. "And I'm wondering why a woman of your standing would travel all this way alone to pursue charges against a former employee. Seems a bit excessive." Mrs. Hargrove's smile tightened. "The items stolen were of significant value, both monetary and sentimental." "Ah, I see," Yancey said, nodding as if in understanding. "And these items, have they been recovered?" "No," Mrs. Hargrove admitted. "We believe Miss Johnston sold them to fund her escape west." "Interesting." Yancey was now standing at the front of the church, facing Mrs. Hargrove directly. "Because I have information suggesting there were no items stolen at all. That this warrant," he gestured to the paper in Sheriff Collins's hand, "was obtained under false pretenses to silence a young woman who knew too much about your son's proclivities." The crowd stirred. Mrs. Hargrove's face flushed red. "How dare you? This is slander." "Is it?" Yancey turned to address the townspeople. "Folks, I used to hunt men who ran from the law. Got pretty good at telling the difference between those running from justice and those running toward it." He looked back at Mrs. Hargrove. "And I believe Madeline Johnston came west not to escape punishment, but to escape persecution." "This is absurd," Mrs. Hargrove sputtered. "Sheriff, I insist you remove this man. I'd like to hear what he has to say," Sheriff Collins interrupted, his gaze thoughtful as he studied Yancey. Yancey nodded his thanks. "I've recently come into possession of some letters between Mr. and Mrs. Hargrove discussing how to handle their son's unfortunate behaviors with female servants, and a settlement agreement with the family of a young woman who was hurt by Richard Hargrove just 3 months ago." Mrs. Hargrove's face had gone from red to white. "Those are private family matters. They have nothing to do with this case." "Don't they?" Yancey countered. "They establish a pattern. Richard Hargrove preys on young women in his household. When they resist or complain, the family uses its wealth and influence to silence them, or in Madeline's case, to destroy them." "Lies," Mrs. Hargrove hissed. "All lies. You have no proof." "Actually," came a new voice from the church entrance, "he does." Every head turned to see Elizabeth Hargrove standing in the doorway, her small figure silhouetted against the darkening sky outside. "Elizabeth," Mrs. Hargrove gasped. "What are you doing here?" Elizabeth walked down the aisle, her steps measured, her chin high despite the trembling of her hands. "I brought the proof, Mother. I can't be silent anymore." Mrs. Hargrove's composure cracked. "You stupid, ungrateful child. After everything we've done for you, you've done nothing but teach me that wealth and position are more important than truth and decency." Elizabeth replied, her voice gaining strength. "What Richard did to Madeline, what he tried to do, was wrong. What he did to Mary Sullivan was worse. And what you and Father did to protect him was unforgivable." A stunned silence fell over the church. Elizabeth turned to Sheriff Collins. "That warrant is based on false accusations. Madeline Johnston stole nothing from our family. She fled because my brother assaulted her, and my parents threatened to ruin her if she spoke out. She opened the portfolio she carried and began distributing documents to the sheriff and Reverend Porter. These are copies of letters between my parents discussing how to handle Richard's indiscretions. And this is the settlement agreement with Mary Sullivan's family. Note the description of her injuries, and the clause forbidding her from ever speaking about what happened." The sheriff read quickly, his expression darkening with each page. When he looked up, his eyes were hard. "Mrs. Hargrove, these documents suggest a pattern of criminal behavior and obstruction of justice. If authentic, they cast serious doubt on the allegations against Miss Johnston." Mrs. Hargrove looked around the room, seeing only hostile or pitying faces. Her careful facade cracked completely. "You have no right," she shrieked at Elizabeth. "No right to betray your family this way. Your brother is a predator," Elizabeth finished quietly, "and you enabled him for years." Mrs. Hargrove's gaze darted around the room, finally landing on Madeline, who had risen from her seat at the back. "You," she hissed, "you turned my own daughter against me." "No, Mother," Elizabeth said sadly. "You did that yourself." What happened next occurred so quickly that later, witnesses would disagree on the exact sequence of events. Mrs. Hargrove lunged toward Madeline, something glinting in her hand, a small knife she had pulled from her reticule. Several people shouted warnings. Sheriff Collins moved to intercept her. But it was Yancey who reached her first, catching her wrist and twisting until the knife clattered to the floor. "That's enough," he said, his voice deadly quiet. "It's over, Mrs. Hargrove." The sheriff took custody of the now sobbing woman, while Reverend Porter called for calm among the shocked townspeople. Elizabeth stood frozen in the aisle, tears streaming down her face as she watched her mother being led away. Madeline went to her immediately, pulling her into an embrace. "You were so brave," she whispered. "So very brave." "What will happen to her?" Elizabeth asked, her voice small. "That depends," Sheriff Collins said, returning after handing Mrs. Hargrove off to his deputy. "These accusations against your brother, are you willing to make them official? And these documents, will you testify to their authenticity?" Elizabeth looked at Madeline, seeking reassurance. Madeline nodded encouragingly. "Yes," Elizabeth said finally. "Yes to both. It has to stop." The sheriff nodded. "Then I'll hold Mrs. Hargrove for attempted assault and send these documents to the federal marshal in Helena. They'll want to investigate the Philadelphia end of things." He turned to Madeline. "As for this warrant, I'm setting it aside pending further investigation. You're free to go about your business, Miss Johnston." The relief that washed over Madeline was so profound that her knees nearly buckled. It was really over. The nightmare that had begun in Philadelphia and followed her west was finally ending. As the crowd dispersed, full of excited chatter about the evening's dramatic events, Yancey approached Madeline and Elizabeth. "You did well," he told Elizabeth gently. "Both of you did." Elizabeth managed a watery smile. "What happens now?" "Now," Matthew said, joining them, "you both get some rest. Tomorrow will be soon enough to decide next steps." They left the church together, Matthew, Madeline, Elizabeth, and Yancey, an unlikely group bound by the events of the evening. Outside, the night air was cool and clear, stars scattered across the Montana sky like diamonds on black velvet. As they walked toward the Mercantile, Yancey fell into step beside Madeline. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. "Yes," she replied, surprised to find it was true. "For the first time in months, I think I really am." He nodded, his eyes reflecting the starlight. "Good, that's good." Something in his voice made her look up at him more closely. "And you, are you all right?" A small smile touched his lips. "I will be." It wasn't until they reached the Mercantile that Madeline realized he had been walking with his hand hovering near the small of her back, not touching her, but ready to catch her if she stumbled. The realization sent a warm flutter through her chest. Perhaps the end of one nightmare could be the beginning of something else entirely. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Mrs. Hargrove was transported to Helena to face charges of attempted assault and potentially more serious accusations once the federal authorities investigated the Philadelphia situation. Elizabeth, after much soul-searching, decided to stay in Gold Hill temporarily, accepting Matthew's offer of a room above the Mercantile. "I can't go back to Philadelphia," she explained to Madeline as they sat in the small parlor one evening. "Not until this is all resolved, and even then." I don't think I could live in that house again. Madeline understood completely. You're welcome here as long as you need, she assured her friend. We survivors need to stick together. Elizabeth smiled, some of the haunted look fading from her eyes. Is that what we are, survivors? That and more, Madeline replied firmly. As for Yancey, he had returned to his ranch outside town after ensuring that Mrs. Hargrove was safely on her way to Helena. Madeline hadn't seen him for nearly a week, though Matthew reported that he had stopped by the store once to ask how she was faring. Why doesn't he come see for himself? Madeline wondered aloud, unable to keep the disappointment from her voice. Matthew gave her a knowing look. Shaw's a complicated man, always has been. Give him time. But time was the one thing Madeline wasn't sure she had. With the threat from the Hargroves neutralized, she needed to think about her future. She had no money, no prospects, and while Matthew was generous, she couldn't impose on his hospitality indefinitely. The solution presented itself unexpectedly. Mrs. Peterson, who had taken quite a liking to Madeline, mentioned that the local school was in need of a teacher. The last one quit to get married last spring, she explained as she kneaded bread dough in Matthew's kitchen. They've been making do with various townsfolk taking turns, but what they really need is someone educated, someone who knows literature and figures and such. I've never taught before, Madeline said doubtfully. But you were educated at that fancy Philadelphia Ladies' Academy, weren't you? That's more schooling than most folks around here ever get. The idea took root. The next day, Madeline visited the head of the school board, a gruff but fair-minded rancher named Harold Thatcher. After a brief interview, during which she demonstrated her knowledge of mathematics, literature, and history, she was offered the position. It's not much pay, Mr. Thatcher warned. $20 a month plus room and board at the schoolhouse. It has a small apartment in back. I accept, Madeline said without hesitation. A place of her own, work that would allow her to be independent, it was more than she had dared hope for. She was walking back to the mercantile, her mind full of plans for her new position, when she quite literally ran into Yancey Shaw coming out of the gunsmith shop. "Oh," she exclaimed as his hands shot out to steady her. "I'm sorry, I wasn't looking where," she broke off as she recognized him. "Yancey, Madeline," his eyes swept over her, noting the color in her cheeks and the brightness of her eyes. "You look well." "I am well," she replied, suddenly acutely aware of his hands still holding her arms. "My side is almost fully healed. Dr. Miller removed the stitches yesterday." "Good." "That's good." He seemed reluctant to let go, though he finally did, taking a small step back. "Matthew said you've been busy." "Yes, she paused, gathering her courage. "Actually, I was just offered a position as the school teacher here in Gold Hill. I start next week." Something flickered across his face, surprise, certainly, but also what looked like pleasure. "A teacher, that seems fitting." "Does it?" She tilted her head, studying him. "You have a patient way about you," he explained. "And you're clearly educated. The children will be lucky to have you." The compliment warmed her. "Thank you. I'm a bit nervous but also excited. It will be good to have purpose again, to be useful." Yancey nodded, understanding in his eyes. They stood in awkward silence for a moment before he spoke again. "I was just about to get some lunch at the cafe. Would you care to join me?" The invitation was so unexpected that Madeline momentarily forgot to breathe. "I'd like that," she said finally, hoping her voice sounded steadier than it felt. The Gold Hill Cafe was small but clean, with gingham curtains on the windows and the enticing smell of fresh bread and roasting meat. Yancey guided Madeline to a table near the back, away from curious eyes. They ordered beef stew for him, chicken and dumplings for her, and then found themselves alone again, suddenly unsure what to say to each other outside the context of danger and intrigue. "How is Elizabeth adjusting?" Yancey asked finally, breaking the silence. "Better than I expected," Madeline replied, grateful for the safe topic. "She's received a letter from her father asking her to return home, but she's holding firm. She wants to see this through the investigation, possibly a trial." "She's stronger than she looks," Yancey observed. "Most women are," Madeline said with a small smile. "We have to be." He acknowledged this with a nod. "And are you staying in Gold Hill, I mean?" The question seemed to carry more weight than its simple words suggested. Madeline considered her answer carefully. "I am, for now at least. The teaching position is for the school year after that." She shrugged lightly. "I've learned not to plan too far ahead." "A wise approach in these parts," Yancey agreed, "though it's good to have some roots, people who—" He trailed off, looking slightly uncomfortable. "People who care what happens to you." Madeline's heart quickened. "Yes," she said softly. "That is good." Their food arrived, temporarily halting the conversation. As they ate, Madeline found herself studying Yancey when he wasn't looking. There was something different about him today, a slight softening around the eyes, perhaps, or a lessening of the vigilant tension he usually carried in his shoulders. "Why did you become a bounty hunter?" she asked suddenly. "And why did you stop?" Yancey's fork paused halfway to his mouth. He set it down carefully. "That's a long story." "I have time," Madeline replied simply. He studied her face as if gauging whether she really wanted to know or was just making conversation. Whatever he saw must have satisfied him, because he began to speak. "I was a lawman before deputy sheriff in a small town in Kansas. My older brother was the sheriff. Good men, both of us, or so folks said." A shadow crossed his face. "Then a gang came through the Collier brothers, bad men wanted in 3 states. They robbed the bank, shot my brother when he tried to stop them." His voice grew hard. "He didn't die right away, lingered for 3 days, made me promise to bring them to justice." "And did you?" Madeline asked quietly. "Eventually." Yancey took a sip of coffee, his eyes distant with memory. "Tracked them across 4 states. Took nearly a year. When I finally caught up with them, I had a choice: take them in alive or kill them," Madeline finished when he hesitated. Yancey nodded. "That's what everyone expected, what I wanted to do. But when I had them cornered, I remembered something my brother always said. The difference between justice and vengeance is that justice serves something beyond yourself." He shook his head slightly. "So I brought them in alive. They hanged, but legally, after a fair trial." "That seems like the right choice," Madeline said. "It was. But it changed something in me. I couldn't go back to being a deputy, too many memories. So I became a bounty hunter. Got a reputation for bringing them in alive when possible." His jaw tightened. "Until Hannah." "Your sister," Madeline said softly, remembering what he had told her the night he stood guard over her. "Yes. After she was killed, I tracked the men responsible, brought them in, but—" He looked down at his hands. "It was a close thing, too close. I realized I was losing myself to hate, becoming the kind of man my brother would have been ashamed of." He raised his eyes to meet hers. "So I quit, bought some land outside Gold Hill, started breeding horses, been trying to live a quieter life ever since." "Until you found me bleeding by a stream," Madeline said with a small smile. Something softened in his expression. "Until then, yes." They finished their meal in companionable silence, the shared confidences creating a new ease between them. As they left the cafe, Yancey offered his arm and Madeline took it without hesitation. "I should get back to Matthews," she said as they paused on the boardwalk. "Elizabeth and I are going to look at the schoolhouse this afternoon, see what needs to be done before classes start." Yancey nodded. "I understand." He hesitated, then added, "I'd like to call on you properly. Perhaps Sunday after church," the formal request, so unexpected from this rugged man who had stitched her wound and carried her to safety, brought a warm flush to Madeline's cheeks. "I'd like that very much," she replied. "Good." The smile that transformed his face made him look years younger, easing the hard lines that life had etched around his eyes and mouth. "Until Sunday, then." As she watched him walk away, Madeline felt a lightness in her heart that had been absent for too long. The future, which had seemed so bleak just weeks ago, now held possibilities she hadn't dared to imagine. Sunday couldn't come soon enough. The schoolhouse was a simple one-room building that had obviously been constructed with more enthusiasm than skill. The floors were uneven, the windows drafty, and the wood stove in the corner looked ancient enough to have heated classrooms during the Revolutionary War. But it was clean, thanks to the efforts of town mothers who had taken turns maintaining it, and the attached living quarters, a small bedroom, kitchen, and sitting area were cozy if sparse. Madeline fell in love with it immediately. "It's perfect," she told Elizabeth as they swept and dusted. "My own little kingdom," Elizabeth laughed. "A far cry from the Hargrove mansion, but I see the appeal." She had been different since confronting her mother, more confident, more willing to speak her mind. Independence has its merits. "That it does," Madeline agreed, thinking of her own journey from dependent daughter to accused thief to schoolteacher. How strange and winding life's paths could be. By Sunday, Madeline had moved her few belongings into the schoolhouse apartment and was beginning to feel settled. Elizabeth had decided to remain at Matthews for the time being, working in the mercantile to earn her keep while waiting for news from the federal investigation into her family. Church service that morning was a revelation for Madeline. Instead of the sidelong glances and whispered comments she had feared, she was greeted warmly by the townsfolk. Word of her appointment as teacher had spread, and parents were eager to introduce themselves and their children. "Miss Johnston," said a weathered woman with kind eyes, "I'm Mrs. Baker. My twins, Thomas and Timothy, will be in your class. Fair warning, they're a handful." "Miss Johnston," said another, a burly blacksmith with enormous hands, "my Sophia loves reading. She's 8 and already gone through every book in our house twice." One by one, they came to her mothers, fathers, grandparents, each with stories and warnings and hopes for the children she would teach. By the end of the service, Madeline felt something she hadn't expected, a sense of belonging. She was scanning the church for Yancey as people began to disperse, disappointed when she didn't see him. Perhaps he had changed his mind about calling on her, looking for someone. She turned to find him standing behind her, dressed in what were clearly his Sunday best, a dark suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly, a crisp white shirt, and a string tie. His dark hair was neatly combed, his jaw freshly shaved. He looked so different from the trail-worn man who had found her bleeding in the wilderness that for a moment, Madeline was speechless. "You clean up well, Mr. Shaw," she finally managed, unable to keep a teasing note from her voice. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "As do you, Miss Johnston." She was wearing her best dress, a blue cotton that Matthew had ordered for her from a catalog, insisting it was a gift to celebrate her new position. The color brought out the amber flecks in her hazel eyes, and she had pinned her honey-brown hair up in a simple but elegant style. "Are you still agreeable to my calling on you today?" Yancey asked, a hint of uncertainty in his voice that Madeline found endearing in such a confident man. "Very much so," she assured him. They walked to the schoolhouse together, attracting curious glances from townsfolk who were unaccustomed to seeing the solitary horseman in the company of the new schoolteacher. Madeline could practically hear the gossip starting, but found she didn't mind. Let them talk. After everything she had endured, a little town gossip seemed trivial. At the schoolhouse, she showed Yancey around with pride. "It's not much," she acknowledged, "but it's mine, at least for the school year." "It suits you," he said, looking around the classroom with its rows of desks and slate blackboard. "I can see you here teaching the young ones their letters." His words pleased her more than they should have. "What about you?" she asked. "Will you show me your ranch someday?" "If you'd like to see it," he replied, a new warmth in his voice. "It's nothing fancy, just a small house, barn, some corrals, and the horses, of course." "I'd like to see it very much," Madeline said sincerely. "Perhaps next Sunday." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise followed by pleasure. "Next Sunday," he agreed. They spent the afternoon walking around Gold Hill, talking easily about everything and nothing. Yancey told her about his horses, the bloodlines he was developing, his hopes for building a breeding program known throughout the territory. Madeline shared her ideas for the school, her plans to start a small library for the children. As the sun began to set, they returned to the schoolhouse. At the door, Yancey removed his hat, turning it in his hands in a gesture that betrayed uncharacteristic nervousness. "I've enjoyed today," he said simply. "As have I," Madeline replied, surprised by the sudden flutter of butterflies in her stomach. She was 24 years old, hardly a green girl experiencing her first courtship. And yet, there was something about Yancey Shaw that made her feel both stronger and more vulnerable than she ever had before. He cleared his throat. "I was wondering. That is, I hoped." He shook his head, seemingly frustrated with his own hesitation. "Madeline, may I kiss you good night?" The direct question, so honest and respectful, touched her deeply. "Yes," she whispered. "I'd like that." Yancey stepped closer, one hand gently cupping her cheek. His eyes searched hers one last time, giving her a chance to change her mind. Then, slowly, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle, almost hesitant at first, then deepening as Madeline responded. His arms slipped around her waist, drawing her closer, while her hands found their way to his shoulders. When they finally parted, both were breathing a bit faster, and there was a look in Yancey's eyes that made Madeline's heart race. "Good night, Madeline," he said softly. "Good night, Yancey," she replied, reluctant to let the moment end. He stepped back, settling his hat back on his head. "I'll see you before next Sunday," he promised. "Perhaps for dinner at the cafe on Wednesday." "I'd like that," she said, smiling. She watched him walk away, his tall figure silhouetted against the sunset. Only when he had disappeared from view did she touch her fingers to her lips, still feeling the warmth of his kiss. School began the following day. 28 children, ranging in age from 6 to 16, filed into the schoolhouse, eyeing their new teacher with varying degrees of curiosity, skepticism, and in the case of the older boys, thinly veiled challenge. Madeline met their gazes squarely. "Good morning," she said clearly. "I'm Miss Johnston, and I'll be your teacher this year. We have much to learn together, and I expect your best efforts. In return, you'll have mine." By the end of the first week, she had learned all their names, assessed their varying levels of education, broken up 3 fights, bandaged 1 skinned knee, and fallen completely in love with teaching. The children, responding to her firm but fair approach, gradually accepted her authority. Even the Baker twins, who had initially tested her patience with their constant mischief, were beginning to settle down, especially after she assigned them to help the younger children with their letters, giving their restless energy a constructive outlet. Yancey kept his promise, taking her to dinner at the cafe on Wednesday and walking her home afterward. They talked easily about her first days of teaching, his progress with a particularly difficult colt he was training, and the latest news from Helena regarding Mrs. Hargrove, who was now facing multiple charges related to obstruction of justice. When Sunday came, Madeline dressed with particular care in a sage green skirt and cream-colored blouse. Yancey arrived after church with a surprise, a buggy borrowed from Matthew. "Thought you might prefer not to ride all the way to my place," he explained as he helped her up. "It's only 5 miles, but still." The road to Yancey's ranch wound through rolling hills covered with late summer wildflowers. As they crested the final rise, Madeline caught her breath at the view below. A small but well-built cabin sat in a protected valley, surrounded by corrals where several horses grazed peacefully. A creek wound through the property, its banks lined with cottonwood trees that were just beginning to show hints of autumn gold. Beyond the cabin, mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still bearing traces of last winter's snow. "Oh, Yancey," Madeline breathed. "It's beautiful." "It's home," he said simply, a note of pride in his voice. He showed her around with the same enthusiasm she had displayed in her schoolhouse, the barn he had built himself. The spring-fed well that never ran dry, the vegetable garden he had started with seedlings from Mrs. Peterson. But it was the horses that clearly held his heart. Each one had a name and a story, and he introduced them to Madeline as if presenting old friends. "This is Maybelle," he said, stroking the neck of a dappled gray mare. "Best dam I have. All her foals inherit her sweet temper. And this fellow?" Madeline asked, indicating a handsome chestnut stallion who watched them imperiously from a separate corral. "Firewalker," Yancey replied with a grin. "My best stud, and he knows it. Fastest horse in the county, may be the territory, but a gentleman at heart for all his showing off." They picnicked under a cottonwood by the creek, sharing a meal Madeline had prepared: fried chicken, biscuits, and apple tart. As they ate, Yancey spoke more openly than he ever had before about his hopes for the ranch, his dreams of building something lasting. "I'd like to expand eventually," he said, gesturing toward the hills. "That land to the east is for sale. Good grazing, sheltered valleys for winter." "It sounds perfect," Madeline said, watching his face light up as he described his plans. "Almost," he agreed, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Just missing a few things to make it complete." The implication hung in the air between them, unspoken but unmistakable. Neither was ready to put it into words, yet it was too soon, too new. But the possibility was there, shimmering like heat over summer plains. As autumn deepened into winter, Madeline's life fell into a pleasant routine. Weekdays were devoted to teaching, with evenings spent preparing lessons or grading the children's work. Sundays belonged to Yancey Church in the morning, followed by dinner either at his ranch or in town. They were courting, though neither had formally acknowledged it as such. The people of Gold Hill certainly saw it that way, nodding approvingly when they passed by together, or inviting them as a pair to social events. Elizabeth, who had become a dear friend and confidante, teased Madeline gently about her blossoming romance. "He looks at you the way men in novels look at their beloved," she said one evening as they sat by the fire in Matthew's parlor. "Like your water in the desert." "Does he?" Madeline asked, unable to keep the pleasure from her voice. "You know he does." Elizabeth's expression grew more serious. "Have you told him everything? About Philadelphia, I mean," Madeline nodded. "Most of it. I haven't gone into details about that night with Richard, but he knows the essentials. And he believes me without question or hesitation." Madeline smiled softly, remembering Yancey's reaction, the anger on her behalf, the quiet declaration that Richard Hargrove was fortunate to be far away, because otherwise they would have words. "He's a good man," Elizabeth said with a sigh. "I hope someday I find someone who looks at me the way he looks at you." News from Philadelphia came in bits and pieces over the following weeks. The federal investigation had uncovered a pattern of abuse and cover-ups by the Hargrove family. Richard had fled to Europe when the scandal broke. Mr. Hargrove was fighting the charges but facing financial ruin as business associates distanced themselves from the family. And Mrs. Hargrove, after a brief trial in Helena, had been sentenced to 2 years in the territorial prison for attempted assault and obstruction of justice. The Philadelphia charges against Madeline had been formally dropped, clearing her name completely. "I should feel vindicated," Madeline told Yancey as they sat by his fireplace on a snowy December evening. "But mostly I just feel sad. So many lives damaged by one family's pride." Yancey nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Justice isn't always satisfying," he said quietly. "That's something I learned as a bounty hunter. Sometimes even when the right thing happens, it still leaves a hole." "Elizabeth blames herself," Madeline continued, "for not speaking up sooner, for not being stronger. She's young," Yancey pointed out, "and she did stand up when it mattered most for you." He reached over and took Madeline's hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "She helped give you a fresh start here." "A better start than I could have imagined," Madeline admitted, meeting his gaze. The fire crackled, sending shadows dancing across the cabin walls. Outside, snow fell softly, blanketing the world in quiet white. Inside, something was building between them, a tension that had been growing for weeks. "Madeline," Yancey said finally, his voice low and serious, "I need to tell you something." Her heart quickened. "Yes. When I found you that day, bleeding by the stream, I was at the lowest point I'd been in years, angry at the world, at God, at myself, just going through the motions of living." He squeezed her hand gently. "Saving you saved me too, in a way I can't fully explain." Tears pricked at Madeline's eyes. "Yancey, let me finish," he said softly. "I'm not good with words and I need to say this right." He took a deep breath. "I love you. I think I started falling for you that first night, watching you fight to survive. And every day since then, I've fallen a little more. Your courage, your kindness, your determination, everything about you." Madeline's heart felt too full for her chest. "I love you too," she whispered. "I have for so long now." Yancey's smile was like sunrise breaking over mountains. He stood, pulling her gently to her feet, then knelt before her. From his pocket, he withdrew a small velvet pouch. "This was my mother's," he said, opening it to reveal a simple gold ring with a small but perfect diamond. "I've been carrying it for weeks, waiting for the right moment." He looked up at her, his blue eyes filled with love and hope. "Madeline Johnston, will you marry me? Make this ranch a home with me, share my life, maybe even give me children someday?" "Yes," she said through happy tears. "Yes to all of it." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood and drew her into his arms. This kiss was different from any they had shared before, deeper, more passionate, full of promise and longing. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Yancey rested his forehead against hers. "When?" he asked simply. "Christmas," Madeline decided impulsively. "It's only 3 weeks away." "Is that too soon?" Yancey laughed, a joyous sound that filled the cabin. "I'd marry you tomorrow if I could," he confessed. "Christmas is perfect." They were married on Christmas Eve in the Gold Hill Church, with snow falling gently outside and candles illuminating the simple sanctuary. Reverend Porter officiated, beaming at the couple who had overcome so much to find each other. Matthew gave Madeline away, his eyes suspiciously bright as he placed her hand in Yancey's. Elizabeth stood as her maid of honor, radiant in a blue dress that matched her eyes. The church was filled with townsfolk who had come to see their schoolteacher, and the formerly solitary horsemen joined their lives together. Madeline wore a cream-colored dress that Mrs. Peterson and Elizabeth had helped her make, with tiny pearls sewn into the bodice and lace at the cuffs and collar. Her honey-brown hair was crowned with a wreath of winter greenery and white ribbons. Yancey couldn't take his eyes off her as she walked down the aisle toward him. When she reached his side and smiled up at him, he felt a peace settle over him that he had never known before. The vows they spoke were traditional, but the meaning behind them ran deeper than words could express. When Reverend Porter pronounced them man and wife, and Yancey lifted her veil to kiss her, the church erupted in cheers and applause. The celebration afterward was held in the town hall, with everyone in Gold Hill contributing to the feast. There was dancing and laughter, toasts and well wishes, and through it all, Yancey kept Madeline close, as if afraid she might disappear if he let go. "Happy?" he asked softly as they shared their first dance as husband and wife. "Completely," she replied, her eyes shining with joy. "And you? More than I thought possible," he admitted, spinning her gently to the music. Later that night, he carried her across the threshold of their cabin, their home now, where a fire blazed welcomingly in the hearth, and fresh evergreen boughs adorned the mantel. Outside, stars sparkled in the clear winter sky, and the snow-covered landscape glowed with moonlight. Inside, two people who had found each other against all odds began their life together, healing each other's wounds, strengthening each other's resolve, and building something beautiful from the broken pieces of their pasts. 5 years later, on a warm spring afternoon, Madeline Shaw sat on the porch of the ranch house, watching her husband teaching their 4-year-old son, Thomas, to ride a gentle pony in the front yard. Nearby, 2-year-old Hannah toddled after butterflies, her copper curls bouncing in the sunlight. The ranch had prospered beyond their hopes. Yancey's breeding program had gained recognition throughout the territory, with buyers coming from as far as Denver and Salt Lake City for his horses. The additional land he had dreamed of was now part of their property, and a new, larger house had replaced the original cabin, though they had preserved it as a guest house, unable to part with the place where their life together had begun. Madeline still taught at the Gold Hill School, having arranged her schedule so that she could be home with the children during summer and winter breaks. She had started a proper library for the town as well, housed in a small building next to the schoolhouse, and stocked with books donated by everyone from Matthew to the territorial governor. Elizabeth had eventually returned to Philadelphia, but not before meeting a young lawyer who had come west to assist with the federal investigation into the Hargroves. They were married now, with a baby on the way, living in Denver where he had established a successful practice. Matthew still ran the mercantile, though he now had a partner, a widow from Helena, who had come to Gold Hill to visit relatives and never left. The twinkle in his eye when he spoke of her suggested that another wedding might be in Gold Hill's future. As for the Hargroves, they had faded from Madeline's life. Mrs. Hargrove had served her sentence and returned east, a broken woman whose social standing was irreparably damaged. Mr. Hargrove had died the previous year, his business empire much diminished. And Richard had reportedly married a European countess, though Elizabeth's letters suggested the marriage was already failing due to his continuing indiscretions. None of it mattered much to Madeline anymore. The past was truly past, its power to hurt her gone like morning mist before the sun. "Mama, look at me," Thomas called, sitting proudly on his pony as Yancey led them in a circle. "I'm riding all by myself. I see you, my brave boy," Madeline called back, her heart swelling with love. "You're doing wonderfully." Hannah abandoned her butterfly chase and climbed onto her mother's lap, her small hands patting Madeline's rounded belly where their third child grew. "Baby?" she asked, her favorite question these days. "Yes, sweet pea, baby brother or sister is in there, growing strong." Madeline smoothed her daughter's wild curls. Just a few more months until you meet them. Yancey looked up, catching Madeline's eye across the yard. The love in his gaze was as strong as ever, deepened by the years they had shared, the children they had created, the life they had built together. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the children were asleep, they would sit together on this same porch and remember how they had found each other, she bleeding and desperate, he lonely and adrift. How a brutal ambush and its aftermath had led, improbably, to this abundance of love and joy. No regrets, Yancey would ask occasionally, an old habit from their early days together. Not one, Madeline would always reply, leaning into his embrace. Every step, even the painful ones, led me here, to you, to us. And that, she knew with unshakable certainty, was worth everything.